Imagine waking up in a medieval village just before sunrise. The air is cold, the ground is hard, and the day begins not with an alarm clock, but with the sound of animals, coughing neighbors, and someone already chopping wood because daylight is precious, very precious. This was the medieval world, quiet, slow, and always just one bad season away from disaster. Most people back then did not think about the future very much, not because they were careless, but because survival took all their energy. If you woke up alive, that was already a small success. If you ate twice in one day, that was a good day. And if you lived past your 30s, you were doing better than most. What many medieval people did not realize was how close humanity often came to shrinking down to almost nothing, not from one big event, but from many small problems stacking up slowly, like cracks in a wall. The medieval population was tiny compared to today. The entire world had fewer people than one modern continent. Cities were small, villages were scattered, and huge areas of land were empty or dangerous to live in. If something went wrong, there were not many people to replace those who were lost. And things went wrong often. Life was fragile. Crops depended on the weather. Food depended on crops, health depended on food, and everything depended on luck. A cold winter, a wet summer, or a bad harvest could quietly remove thousands of people without a single battle or dramatic moment. This is why extinction was not a dramatic idea back then. It was not imagined as a sudden ending. It was more like a slow fading. Fewer children one year, fewer families the next, a village abandoned, then another. Many medieval dangers were invisible. People did not know about germs, bacteria, or long-term poisoning. They blamed bad luck, bad air, or simply accepted sickness as part of life. If enough people got sick at once, entire regions could empty out before anyone understood what was happening. And medical help was, let's say, limited, very limited. Doctors did exist, but most people never saw one. Treatment was often guessing. If you were sick, you rested. If that did not work, someone tried something else. If that did not work either, well, at least you tried. Because of this, survival often depended more on community than knowledge. Villages shared food, helped the weak when possible, and rebuilt when disaster hit. But even strong communities could collapse if problems lasted too long. Another issue was time. Recovery was slow. If a modern city loses people, it can rebuild quickly. Medieval societies did not have that luxury. Losing one generation meant losing workers, parents, and knowledge all at once. It could take decades just to return to normal, assuming nothing else went wrong in the meantime. And something else always went wrong. Daily life itself was dangerous. Cooking over open fires, working with sharp tools, traveling long distances on foot. Even sleeping could be risky in cold weather. Small injuries often became serious. Serious injuries often became final. It is important to understand that medieval people were not weak. They were tough, extremely tough. They worked long hours, endured pain, and adapted constantly. But toughness cannot fix everything, especially when problems come from many directions at once. This is where things become interesting. When we look back, we often focus on famous disasters, big events, big stories. But the real danger to medieval humanity came from ordinary life repeating itself again and again under harsh conditions. Eating the wrong food, drinking the wrong water, living too close together, living too far apart, being unlucky at the wrong time. These small risks added up. Sometimes entire areas slowly emptied as people moved away, starved, or simply disappeared from records. No drama, no announcement, just fewer names written down each year. And because communication was slow, people often did not know how bad things were elsewhere. One region might be struggling while another was already collapsing. By the time news arrived, it was usually too late to help.
This made medieval humanity feel stable on the surface, but extremely fragile underneath, like ice that looks solid until you step on it. Yet, despite all of this, people kept going. They adapted without realizing it. They changed farming habits. They moved settlements. They learned which foods were safer. They adjusted slowly, generation by generation, not because they understood science, but because experience taught them what worked and what did not. Still, the margin for error was thin. One bad century could undo progress made over many generations. One long famine could reduce populations so much that recovery took hundreds of years. In some cases, it never happened at all. This is why the medieval period is full of almost moments, almost collapse, almost disappearance, almost extinction. And what makes it more strange is that people living through it rarely noticed the scale of danger. They were too busy surviving the week, the month, or the winter. From their perspective, life was normal, hard but normal. From our perspective, it looks like humanity was constantly walking near the edge without knowing it. In this documentary, we are not looking at dramatic endings. We are looking at slow dangers, quiet mistakes, everyday risks that nearly reduced human populations beyond recovery. Not all at once, but little by little. So as we move forward, keep this idea in mind. Medieval extinction was not loud. It was soft. It came with empty houses, silent fields, and fewer voices at night. And somehow, against all odds, people kept waking up the next morning.
The cold did not arrive with drama. No loud warning, no announcement. It simply stayed longer than expected. In the medieval world, winter was already uncomfortable on a good year. Homes were small, dark, and badly insulated. Firewood was precious. Blankets were heavy but never warm enough. People slept close together, not for comfort but for survival. When winter lasted longer than usual, that careful balance began to break. Cold meant more than discomfort. It meant food stopped growing, fields turned hard, animals grew weak, and once food became scarce, everything else followed quietly behind it. There were periods during medieval times when temperatures dropped for years, even decades. Summers became shorter, winters became longer. Crops that once grew easily now struggled. Seeds failed, harvests shrank, and when harvests shrink, people notice very quickly. Most medieval families lived from one harvest to the next. There were no big reserves, no emergency storage. If 1 year went badly, you could survive. If 2 years went badly, things became dangerous. If 3 years failed in a row, entire regions started to empty. Cold also slowed recovery. Even after a bad year, the land needed time to heal. But when cold weather returned again and again, there was no recovery time. The soil stayed weak. Farmers planted with hope, not confidence. And hope is not very filling. People tried to adapt. They wore more layers. They burned more wood. They worked harder. But effort could not change the weather. Cold does not care how determined you are. Animals suffered too. Livestock needed food, just like humans. When fodder ran out, animals died or had to be slaughtered early. That gave families a short burst of meat, followed by nothing. Losing animals also meant losing tools for farming and transport. One winter could undo years of work. Cold weather also changed how diseases spread. Weakened bodies got sicker faster. Healing slowed down. Small infections became serious. A simple cough could turn dangerous when combined with hunger and cold air. And the worst part was how quiet it all was. No single moment marked disaster. There was no day where everyone agreed things had gone wrong. Instead, people noticed smaller signs: children growing thinner, fewer weddings, fewer births, more empty beds. Villages did not vanish overnight. They thinned out. One family left, another failed to survive winter. Houses stayed standing, but no one lived inside. Fields returned to grass.
paths faded. Cold also limited movement. Roads became difficult or impossible. Frozen rivers blocked travel. Snow trapped people where they were. When help was needed, it could not arrive. When food existed somewhere else, it might as well have been on another planet. People learned to fear late spring frosts more than winter itself. When frost came after planting, it destroyed hope for the year. Seeds died silently underground. Farmers waited, watched, and slowly realized nothing would grow. Some years, summer barely felt like summer at all. Cold rain replaced warmth. Crops rotted instead of ripened. Grain became useless. Even animals struggled to find dry shelter. And once hunger started, it changed behavior. People made difficult choices. They ate seed grain meant for planting. They sold tools. They left their homes in search of better land, often finding none. Migration became survival, but migration also spread weakness and sickness. Children suffered the most. Their bodies needed food to grow. Without it, survival rates dropped. When enough children were lost, the future of a community disappeared quietly. Cold also reshaped landscapes. Forests expanded where farms were abandoned. Wildlife returned to empty land. Wolves moved closer to settlements searching for food, which created new dangers for people already struggling. The strange thing is that cold itself did not kill most people directly. It set off a chain of events that did: hunger, sickness, weakness, and slow decline. The weather only started the process. From a modern point of view, it is easy to underestimate this danger. Today, cold is uncomfortable. Back then, cold was powerful. It decided whether societies grew or shrank. There were moments when large parts of the medieval world were dealing with the same problem at the same time. Cold across regions meant no backup, no neighboring area with extra food. Everyone was struggling together. This created population bottlenecks. Human numbers dropped not just locally, but widely. Recovery took generations, and during recovery, another cold period could arrive and undo everything again. People adapted where they could. They changed planting times. They chose hardier crops. They built thicker walls. These changes helped, but only slightly. Nature still held the advantage. What makes this more unsettling is how often it happened. Cold periods were not rare events. They returned again and again. Humanity survived each time, but always with losses. There were points where populations became so low that a few more bad years could have pushed them beyond recovery. No drama, no final moment, just not enough people left to continue. And yet, people kept going. They rebuilt, they replanted, they learned which hills stayed warmer and which valleys flooded. Slowly, painfully, they adapted. Not because they understood climate, but because survival forced them to observe carefully. The cold never disappeared. It only loosened its grip for a while. As people slept in their small homes, wrapped in layers, listening to the wind outside, they didn't think about extinction. They thought about morning, about fire, about whether there would be food tomorrow. That quiet focus on the next day is maybe what saved humanity more than anything else. The cold almost ended everything, not with violence, but with patience, and it would not be the last quiet danger medieval people faced.
Hunger makes people creative, sometimes too creative. In the medieval world, food was never guaranteed. When harvests failed or stores ran low, people did not stop eating. They simply changed what eating meant, and that is where trouble quietly began. On a normal year, most people ate simple food: bread, porridge, vegetables, maybe some dairy. Meat was rare for many families. This basic diet worked well enough when crops behaved, but when they didn't, people started experimenting, often without realizing the risks. Bread was the center of medieval life. If you had bread, you were doing okay. If you did not, you were in trouble. So when grain supplies ran low or grain quality dropped, people still made bread anyway. They used whatever they had. Sometimes the grain looked fine, sometimes it smelled fine, sometimes it even tasted normal, but hidden inside certain grains were tiny problems that caused very big outcomes. One of the most dangerous was spoiled grain. In wet or cold years, grain could grow strange growths that were easy to miss. When ground into flour and baked, these did not disappear. They stayed in the bread, quietly waiting. People who ate this bread became sick in strange ways. Some felt burning pain, some lost feeling in their hands or feet, others became confused, restless, or weak. Entire households could be affected at once, but because the bread looked like bread, no one suspected it. They kept eating it. Over time, this led to mass sickness. People could not work, could not walk properly, could not recover easily. In already weak communities, this was devastating. Fewer workers meant less food, which meant more dangerous bread, which meant even fewer workers. A very bad cycle. During extreme famines, people went even further. They ate things never meant to be eaten: tree bark, roots, grass, even dirt mixed into flour to make it stretch longer. These foods filled the stomach but offered almost no nutrition. Some were actively harmful. Children especially suffered from this. Their bodies needed nutrients to grow. Instead, they received empty filler. Growth slowed, immunity weakened, survival became uncertain. Some substitutes damaged the stomach and intestines. People experienced constant pain, weakness, and dehydration. In a time without proper medical care, this was often fatal, not quickly, but slowly. Another problem was storage. Medieval storage methods were limited. Food was kept in damp cellars, wooden containers, or simple sacks. This made it easy for food to spoil without obvious signs. Moldy food was common, but hunger makes people ignore warning signs. If it smells bad, cook it longer was not a safe strategy. Cooking did not fix everything. Some toxins survived heat. Some spoiled foods became even more dangerous when cooked improperly. But when the choice was eat or starve, people chose to eat. Animals were not safe either. During hard times, people ate animals that were sick, weak, or already dying. This saved food in the short term, but caused sickness later. Meat preservation was unreliable, especially in warmer months. Milk spoiled quickly, cheese could fail, even preserved foods could go wrong. A single bad batch could affect an entire family or village. What made this especially dangerous was how confusing it looked. People did not connect food to sickness clearly. They might blame weather, exhaustion, or general weakness. Meanwhile, the real cause was being eaten every day. There were times when entire regions experienced waves of illness caused by food problems. Productivity dropped, birth rates dropped, death rates rose quietly. These were not fast disasters, they were slow drains on population. And because medieval populations were already small, these losses mattered more. One bad harvest might not destroy a society, but one bad harvest followed by dangerous food choices could weaken it for decades. Recovery required not just more food, but safer food, and knowing what was safe was not easy. People did learn, slowly. Certain grains became trusted, certain signs of spoilage were avoided. Some communities developed habits that reduced risk, but learning often came after loss. Sometimes entire villages became known for sickness, while others nearby survived simply because their soil drained better or their storage stayed drier. Small environmental differences decided who lived and who struggled. The strange part is that people often believed they were being resourceful, and in a way they were. Using everything available was logical. The problem was that biology does not reward effort, only results. Food that looks harmless can be dangerous. Food that fills the stomach can still starve the body. Medieval people learned this lesson the hard way. And hunger pushes boundaries. When children are crying, when winter is long, when stores are empty, rules disappear. Survival thinking takes over. Long-term consequences feel distant. This is how entire populations weakened themselves without knowing it. Not with poison meant to harm, but with food meant to save. Over generations, these patterns shaped population levels. Areas with safer food habits grew. Areas without them shrank or vanished. Sometimes a few bad years erased centuries of settlement.
And yet, people kept experimenting. They had no choice. Humanity survived these mistakes not because they were avoided, but because enough people lived through them to pass on warnings. Don't eat that. That grain causes sickness. This keeps longer. Knowledge grew slowly, written in experience rather than books. Still, the margin for error remained thin. Eating the wrong thing did not feel dangerous at first. It felt necessary, and that made it one of the most quiet threats medieval people faced. They sat down to eat, hoping to survive the day, unaware that the meal itself might slowly remove them from the future.
Water seems harmless. It looks clear, it feels cool, and when you are thirsty, it feels like the safest thing in the world. For medieval people, water was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Rivers, wells, streams, rain barrels. Water was part of daily life, but clean water was not something people could easily recognize, and that made it one of the most dangerous things they depended on. Most towns and villages shared water sources. The same river that provided drinking water was also used for washing clothes, cleaning tools, and sometimes disposing of waste. Animals drank there too. Sometimes animals stood upstream while people filled buckets downstream. Nobody thought much about it. Water flowed, so it must be fine. That was the logic. Wells felt safer. They were deeper and cooler, but wells had problems too. If they were too close to waste pits or animal areas, bad things slowly leaked in. No smell, no warning, just invisible trouble. People did not boil water often. Fuel was expensive. Firewood took time and energy to gather. If water looked clear, it was usually trusted. If it tasted normal, even better. This trust was often misplaced. Many medieval illnesses came from water, but people did not know it. When sickness spread through a household, they blamed bad air, weather, or general weakness. Meanwhile, the water was being poured again and again. Cities had it worse. More people meant more waste. Streets were narrow, drainage was poor. Rain washed everything downhill into water sources. During dry periods, water became concentrated with everything people wanted to forget about. And people kept drinking it. Slow sickness followed. Stomach pain, weakness, dehydration, fevers. Not dramatic at first, just enough to make daily work harder. When enough people were affected, productivity dropped, fields went untended, food became scarce, and the cycle began again. Children were especially vulnerable. Their smaller bodies could not handle what adults tolerated. Infant survival rates dropped sharply during bad water periods. Families lost children without understanding why. There were times when entire towns became known for sickness. Travelers avoided them if they could. Some places slowly emptied as people moved away, not knowing exactly what they were escaping, only that life felt harder there. Another quiet danger came from materials used to carry water. Containers were often made from metal, clay, or wood. Some metals slowly leached into water over time. This did not cause immediate sickness, but long-term exposure weakened the body. People grew tired more easily, joints hurt, thinking became slower. No one blamed the cup. Water storage was also a problem. Standing water became stale, insects gathered, small animals fell in and were not always removed quickly, but when thirst is strong, standards change. During winter, water sources froze. People chipped ice from rivers or melted snow. This took effort and time. Sometimes people chose convenience over safety, drinking from closer, dirtier sources instead. In dry summers, water levels dropped, streams slowed, wells went shallow. What had been diluted before became concentrated. Sickness increased just when people were already tired from heat and work. The danger of water was how ordinary it was. No one questioned it daily. You wake up, you drink. You work, you drink. You come home tired, you drink again. If something makes you sick slowly, it becomes part of life instead of a warning. Entire generations lived with constant low-level illness. This lowered population growth without dramatic events. Fewer healthy pregnancies, more complications, slower recovery from injury. Water did not kill quickly, it weakened, and weakness was deadly in a medieval world. People did notice patterns sometimes. Certain wells were avoided, certain streams were preferred. These habits helped, but they were local knowledge, not shared widely. A village might survive while the next one struggled.
Travelers brought problems too: new waste, new sickness, new strain on limited water. During busy seasons, towns became crowded and water quality dropped fast. Floods made things worse. Floodwater mixed everything together and spread it everywhere. After floods, sickness often followed. People blamed the flood damage, not the water left behind. Despite all this, water remained essential. People could avoid bad food sometimes. They could delay eating, but water could not be skipped for long. That made it unavoidable. Some communities tried solutions: deeper wells, covered sources, rules about waste placement. These helped when followed, but enforcement was difficult and understanding was limited. It's strange to think that something so necessary came so close to reducing human populations simply by being misunderstood. Water shaped where people lived. Villages formed near sources. When those sources became dangerous, entire settlements declined. People moved, leaving behind buildings and memories. Over centuries, these patterns repeated. Towns rose and fell based on water quality. Populations shifted slowly, guided by thirst more than strategy. Modern people often imagine medieval dangers as dramatic: swords, fires, loud disasters. But water was quiet. It did its work without sound. People drank, they felt tired, they got sick. They recovered slowly or not at all, and life went on, just with fewer people. Humanity survived this not because water became safe, but because people slowly learned where danger hid. They learned through loss, through experience, through watching which places lasted and which faded. Still, the margin remained thin. Water, the thing that gives life, also quietly took it away, not with intention, not with force, but with patience. As medieval people carried buckets from wells and rivers, they believed they were doing the safest thing possible, and most days they were wrong without knowing it.
Sickness in the medieval world did not knock on the door. It simply walked in and sat down. Most illnesses started quietly: one person feeling tired, another with a fever, someone missing work for a few days. Nothing alarming at first. Life was hard already, so feeling unwell was normal. People expected to be uncomfortable most of the time. The problem was how fast sickness could move once it started. Medieval people lived close together. Houses were small, families shared beds. Animals often lived nearby or even inside during cold months. Streets were narrow, markets were crowded. This closeness made daily life easier, but it also made sickness efficient. Once an illness appeared, it did not stay in one place for long. Travel helped it along. Traders, messengers, workers, and seasonal laborers moved between towns. They carried goods, stories, and sometimes sickness without knowing it. By the time people realized something was wrong, it had already moved on. And people did not isolate, not because they were careless, but because isolation was dangerous. Staying alone meant no food, no help, and no warmth. So people stayed together, even when someone was sick. That made recovery harder. Some sicknesses came and went quickly. Others stayed. Some returned again and again. A village might recover, only to be hit again a few years later. Each wave removed more people. The scary part was unpredictability. One year, an illness might be mild. The next time, it could be deadly. People could not plan for it. They could not prepare properly. They could only react. Children were especially vulnerable. Their immune systems were still developing. When sickness spread, children were often the first to fall ill and the last to recover. Many did not recover at all. Adults suffered too, especially those already weakened by hunger, cold, or hard labor. Illness took advantage of tired bodies. Once weakened, even strong people struggled. Recovery was slow. Without proper care, people rested and hoped. Some recovered, some did not. And while they were sick, work stopped. Fields went untended. Food production dropped. This made the next wave even worse. Entire households could be affected at once. When parents were sick, children had no care. When everyone was sick, nothing functioned. Communities slowed to a crawl.
The worst outbreaks did not always look dramatic. There were no sudden piles of bodies. Instead, there were weeks of exhaustion, coughing, fever, and weakness. People faded. Villages became quieter, fewer sounds at night, fewer people at markets, fewer hands working the fields. Some illnesses returned seasonally, others appeared after harsh winters or wet summers. People noticed patterns, but could not explain them. They adjusted habits slightly, but not enough to stop the spread. Cities faced an even bigger problem. Crowded housing, poor ventilation, and shared water sources created perfect conditions for sickness. Once something started, it spread quickly and widely. There were moments when sickness reduced populations so much that cities struggled to function. Skilled workers disappeared, knowledge was lost. Rebuilding took decades. What made this especially dangerous was repetition. Sickness was not a single event, it was a cycle. Each generation faced it again. Some survived, some did not. Over time, numbers dropped. There were places where sickness returned so often that populations never fully recovered. These areas slowly lost importance. Trade routes shifted, settlements shrank or vanished. People tried to cope. They rested more when possible. They avoided some crowded places during outbreaks. They developed small habits that helped slightly. But without understanding how sickness spread, control was limited. Sometimes communities survived simply because of luck. A village slightly farther from trade routes, a town with better airflow, a season with fewer visitors. Small differences mattered. The danger was not just death, but weakness. Long-term illness left people less able to work, less able to have children, less able to recover from other problems. Population decline did not need high death rates, it only needed consistent loss. And that is exactly what happened. Over centuries, waves of sickness shaped where people lived and how many survived. Humanity did not face extinction all at once. It faced it slowly, one illness at a time. People living through this did not think in large numbers. They thought in personal losses. A child, a neighbor, a friend. The idea that humanity itself was at risk never crossed their minds. They adapted anyway. Some communities became more cautious. Some changed settlement layouts. Some avoided certain areas during outbreaks. These small adjustments helped just enough, but the margin was always thin. One harsh winter followed by sickness could push a region past recovery. One busy trade season could bring illness to places that had been safe for years. Sickness respected no borders. It did not care about wealth or status. It moved where people moved. The quiet nature of this threat made it more dangerous than sudden disasters. There was no clear enemy, no moment to prepare, just a gradual weakening of the population. And yet, humanity endured, not because sickness disappeared, but because enough people survived each wave to continue. Survival was not guaranteed. It was earned slowly, painfully, and often unknowingly. As people lay in bed, sweating through fevers, listening to familiar sounds fade outside, they did not think about extinction. They thought about getting through the night. That focus on the next morning may be what saved humanity again and again.
When medieval people got sick or injured, doing nothing felt dangerous, so they did something. This is where good intentions often went in the wrong direction. Medical care in the medieval world existed, but it was based more on tradition than testing. People believed the body needed balance. If something felt wrong, the solution was usually to remove something, add something, or force the body to react. Sometimes this helped, often it didn't. One of the most common treatments was letting blood out of the body. The idea was simple. If you felt sick, you had too much of something inside you, so removing blood would fix the balance. This was done for fevers, pain, headaches, and even tiredness. The problem was that sick people were already weak. Losing blood made them weaker, sometimes much weaker. People fainted, healing slowed, infections became harder to fight. But because this method had been used for generations, it was trusted. If someone survived after treatment, the treatment was praised. If they didn't, it was assumed the illness was too strong. Another popular solution was strong substances. People believed that powerful problems needed powerful fixes, so they used substances that caused intense reactions. If it burned, stung, or made you very uncomfortable, it was considered effective. Some of these substances were toxic in large amounts, others caused damage over time. People might feel slightly better at first, then much worse later, but the connection was rarely made. Surgery was even more dangerous. Tools were reused. Cleaning was basic at best. Procedures were done quickly, not carefully, because pain control was limited. Speed mattered more than precision. Surviving surgery was not guaranteed. Many people didn't, and those who did often faced long recoveries with infections that could undo everything. Even simple wounds were risky. A cut that would be minor today could become serious. Without proper cleaning, it could swell, ache, and spread. Once infection set in, options were limited. People often avoided treatment until things became unbearable. By then, it was usually too late. There were places meant to help the sick, but these were crowded and poorly ventilated. Sick people stayed close together. Recovery spaces became places where illness spread instead of healed. Rest was the most effective treatment, but rest was hard to afford. Most people needed to work daily to eat. Staying in bed meant hunger, so people pushed through illness until they collapsed. This cycle reduced survival rates quietly. People didn't die instantly, they weakened, they worked less, they recovered slowly. Some never fully recovered at all. Children suffered again here. Their bodies were smaller. Treatments affected them more strongly. A dose meant for an adult could overwhelm a child. Many did not survive treatment that was meant to help. Pain was common and accepted. People expected life to hurt. This meant serious problems were sometimes ignored because they felt similar to everyday discomfort. Another issue was consistency. Different towns used different methods. What worked in one place might harm in another. Knowledge spread slowly and unevenly. Some healers were skilled observers. They learned from experience. They adjusted treatments. These people saved lives quietly, but their knowledge often died with them, not written down, not shared widely. Most care happened at home. Family members did their best with what they knew. Sometimes care helped simply because someone rested and was fed. Other times, care made things worse through overuse of treatments. The danger was not malicious, it was misunderstanding. The body is resilient, but it has limits. Medieval medicine often pushed those limits without knowing where they were. Over generations, these practices shaped survival rates. Communities with gentler care often did better. Communities with aggressive treatment sometimes lost more people. But people didn't compare data, they compared stories. A dramatic recovery after a harsh treatment became proof. Quiet deaths became background noise. This made it hard to improve. Medical mistakes didn't cause extinction alone, but combined with hunger, cold, and sickness, they reduced recovery. They turned fatal illnesses into fatal ones. There were times when doing nothing would have been safer, but choosing nothing felt wrong. Humans want to act, especially when someone they care about is suffering. So they acted, and sometimes action cost lives. Despite this, progress slowly happened. People noticed patterns. Some treatments were abandoned quietly, others were softened. Knowledge grew slowly, painfully, through loss. Humanity survived medieval medicine not because it was effective, but because the human body is stubborn. People healed despite treatment, not always because of it. Still, the cost was high. Weak survivors meant fewer children. Long recoveries meant less food. Less food meant more illness. Everything connected. As people lay recovering or failing to recover, they did not think about medical theory. They thought about relief, about rest, about feeling normal again, and many never reached that point.
The quiet danger of medieval medicine was that it felt helpful, it felt controlled, it gave people something to do when facing the unknown. That comfort kept it in use long after it should have changed.
For medieval people, bringing new life into the world was not a celebration at first. It was a risk. Pregnancy was common. Danger was common too. Nearly every family experienced loss connected to birth in some way. It was not rare. It was expected. Quietly feared, rarely spoken about. Childbirth happened at home. Small rooms, low light, basic tools. No real way to see what was happening inside the body. People relied on experience, instinct, and hope. And hope had limits. The human body is complex. When things go smoothly, birth can happen without trouble. But when something went wrong in the medieval world, options disappeared quickly. There was no safe way to intervene, no way to see problems early, no way to stop complications once they started. Many women went into birth already weakened, years of hard labor, limited food, repeated pregnancies with little recovery time. Their bodies were tired before labor even began. Labor itself could last hours or days. Pain was intense. Exhaustion followed. If progress slowed or stopped, there was little anyone could do. Waiting was often the only option, and waiting was dangerous. Infections were common. Cleanliness was basic. Hands, cloths, and tools were reused. Even when people tried to be careful, invisible problems traveled easily. Once infection began, survival became uncertain. Blood loss was another threat. Even a small amount could be dangerous in a weakened body. Without a way to replace it, strength faded quickly. People could go from alert to exhausted in a short time. Sometimes the baby did not survive. Sometimes the mother did not survive. Sometimes neither did. Families woke the next day missing one or two people, and life continued because it had to. This happened often enough that communities adapted emotionally. Grief existed, but it was quieter. Too much grief would stop daily survival. People learned to keep moving. Infants faced danger immediately. Birth was only the beginning. Many babies were born small or weak. Seeding was difficult. Illness spread easily. Surviving the first year was not guaranteed. This meant population growth was slow even in good times. For every successful birth, there were losses before and after. The numbers barely balanced. When food was scarce, danger increased. Hungry bodies struggled to carry pregnancies. Babies were born weaker. Recovery took longer. Survival rates dropped sharply. Cold made things worse. Winter births were especially risky. Warmth was limited. Infection risk increased. Newborns lost heat quickly. One cold night could undo everything. There were moments when birth rates dropped not because people chose to have fewer children, but because survival did not allow it. Bodies could not handle it. Communities aged without replacement. This had long-term effects. Fewer young people meant fewer workers. Fewer workers meant less food. Less food meant more danger during childbirth. Another quiet cycle. People tried to help. Experienced women guided births. Knowledge passed through observation, not books. Some techniques improved outcomes slightly, others made things worse without realizing it. The danger was inconsistency. What worked once might fail the next time. Every birth was different. Experience helped, but it could not guarantee safety. Men often waited outside, not because they didn't care, but because there was nothing they could do. They listened for sounds. Silence meant worry. Crying meant effort. A newborn's first sound meant relief. Sometimes that sound never came. Childbirth removed women from communities at a steady pace. Losing a mother affected families deeply. Children lost care. Workloads shifted. Households struggled. When enough women were lost in a community, population decline followed. It did not look dramatic. It looked like fewer children playing, fewer young families forming, more quiet houses. Despite this, people continued to have children. They had no other choice. Without new generations, survival was impossible.
Risk was accepted because the alternative was slow disappearance. This makes medieval survival feel almost impossible, and yet people adapted. Spacing between births slowly increased in some areas. Diets improved where possible. Rest after birth became more common when food allowed. Small changes made big differences over time. But the danger never disappeared. Every pregnancy carried uncertainty. Every birth was a test. Communities lived with this risk constantly, without naming it. From a modern view, it is shocking. From a medieval view, it was life. The strange thing is that this constant risk did not make people careless. It made them practical. They prepared quietly. They supported each other when they could. They mourned quickly and moved forward. Humanity survived this not through safety, but through repetition. Enough births succeeded to replace those lost. Barely. There were moments when population dropped so low that one bad decade could have ended entire regions, and childbirth played a role in that danger, not as a dramatic event, but as a steady drain. As women rested after birth, surrounded by familiar sounds, nobody thought about numbers or survival rates. They thought about getting through the night, about warmth, about feeding a child if possible. That focus on the immediate moment kept humanity moving forward, one risky birth at a time.
Fire was helpful. Fire was warm. Fire was also a quiet disaster waiting to happen. In the medieval world, fire was everywhere. It cooked food, heated homes, dried clothes, and provided light after sunset. Without fire, survival was almost impossible. But living with fire every day came with a risk people could never fully control. Homes were built mostly from wood, roofs were thatch, floors were wooden planks or packed earth, walls were close together, streets were narrow. If one building caught fire, the next one usually followed. And fires did not need much encouragement. A spark from a hearth, a tipped candle, a cooking fire left too close to straw, a strong wind at the wrong moment, that was enough. Once flames started, stopping them was difficult. Once they spread, stopping them was nearly impossible. There were no organized fire services, no hoses, no alarms. Buckets of water were the main defense, and water was often far away or frozen in winter. People ran, shouted, and tried to save what they could. Usually, they saved nothing. Entire towns could burn in a single night, not slowly, quickly. Flames moved faster than people expected. Roofs collapsed, smoke filled streets, confusion spread. Fire did not just destroy food stores, it destroyed tools, clothing, seeds for planting. Everything needed to survive the next year could disappear before morning. Winter fires were especially dangerous. People used more fire for warmth. Houses were sealed tightly to keep heat in. Smoke built up, sparks escaped unnoticed. And once a fire started, cold air and wind helped it spread. Surviving the fire was the first problem. Surviving after was harder. Families stood in the cold with nothing, no shelter, no food, no tools. Rebuilding took time and resources most people did not have. Some tried, many left. When people left, towns shrank. Sometimes they never recovered. Fire also caused indirect deaths. Smoke inhalation weakened lungs. Burns became infected. Injuries that might heal today often did not. Survivors carried long-term damage that affected their ability to work. Children were especially vulnerable. They moved slower, they panicked, they inhaled more smoke. Many did not escape in time. Fires did not need to be large to be deadly. A single house fire could trap a family inside. At night, when everyone slept, escape was harder. Darkness and smoke confused even familiar spaces. People tried to prevent fires. They spaced buildings where possible. They banned certain activities in dry weather. They watched fires carefully. But prevention only worked until it didn't. As towns grew, risk increased. More people meant more fires, more cooking, more heating, more chances for mistakes. And mistakes were common. Life was exhausting. People worked long hours. They were tired. They forgot things. They fell asleep. Fire punished exhaustion.
There were moments when repeated fires pushed communities toward collapse. A town might burn once and rebuild, burn twice and struggle, burn 3 times and give up. People moved away, leaving ruins behind. Fire reshaped maps quietly. Some places disappeared not because of invasion or famine, but because they burned too often to survive. The psychological impact mattered too. Living with constant fire risk created stress. People slept lightly. They watched flames closely. Fear became part of daily life. That fear affected decisions. People stored less food indoors. They avoided larger homes. They accepted cramped conditions. These choices had other consequences, often making sickness and crowding worse. Fire also affected food production. Barns burned, grain stores ignited easily. Losing stored grain meant starvation later. Fire did not kill immediately, but it scheduled hunger for the future. After a fire, people relied on neighbors. If neighbors were also affected, there was little help. Regional fires could leave thousands struggling at once. Some fires started naturally. Lightning strikes during dry seasons ignited roofs. Others started from industry, baking ovens, metalworking, breweries. Necessary work increased danger. Fire respected no social level. It burned small homes and large buildings equally. Wealth might rebuild faster, but survival during the fire was random. People learned lessons slowly. Some towns changed building materials where possible. Street replaced wood in certain areas. Streets widened. Fire breaks were created. These changes helped, but they were expensive and slow. Most medieval people never saw these improvements. They lived and died with fire as a daily companion. What makes fire especially dangerous in this story is how quickly it could undo years of survival. A community might endure cold winters, sickness, hunger, and hard labor. Then one night, fire erased everything. Population decline followed not because people died immediately, but because recovery failed. Families left, birth rates dropped, work stopped. Fire was loud in the moment, but quiet in its long-term damage. People did not fear fire constantly. They needed it too much. They respected it, but they also trusted it. That trust sometimes cost them everything. Humanity survived medieval fire not because it became safe, but because enough people rebuilt again and again. Each rebuild made some towns stronger and others disappear. As flames died down and smoke cleared, people stood among ruins and made choices: stay and rebuild, or leave and hope for better somewhere else. Those choices shaped survival.
War in the medieval world was not always loud battles and clashing weapons. Often it was quieter, slower, and far more destructive. Most damage did not come from fighting itself. It came from what happened to the land afterward. When armies moved through an area, they needed food, a lot of food. They did not carry enough with them, so they took it from wherever they passed. Fields were emptied. Animals were taken, storage was broken open, what could not be carried was often destroyed. This was not done out of cruelty, it was done out of necessity. Feeding soldiers mattered more than feeding villages, and once food was gone, survival for civilians became uncertain. Fields were trampled by thousands of feet, crops were crushed before harvest, irrigation systems were damaged, fences were broken. Even if fighting ended quickly, the land took much longer to recover, and recovery was not guaranteed. Farmers who lost everything had few options. Without seed grain, they could not plant. Without animals, they could not plow. Without tools, work slowed to a crawl. Some tried to stay. Many left. When people left, land went unused. Fields returned to grass. Villages became quiet. Roads fell apart. Trade slowed. Entire regions declined without a single dramatic event. War also caused fear. People hid food instead of sharing it. Cooperation weakened. Trust disappeared. Communities became isolated at the exact moment they needed support. Sometimes armies returned to the same region again and again. Each time, less was left. After several passes, nothing remained worth taking. These areas became empty spaces on the map.
Hunger followed closely behind. With land damaged and workers gone, food shortages became common. Even areas not directly affected felt the strain. Prices rose, supplies ran out, everyone suffered. Children suffered the most. Malnutrition weakened them early. Growth slowed. Illness hit harder. Survival rates dropped quietly. War also pulled young people away from farms. Many never returned. This left fewer workers to maintain land. Aging populations struggled to keep up. Even when peace returned, the damage remained. Soil needed years to recover. Infrastructure needed rebuilding. Knowledge had been lost. The people who knew how to farm certain land were gone. Some regions never fully recovered. They stayed underpopulated for generations. Others recovered slowly, only to be damaged again by the next conflict. What made this especially dangerous was scale. Medieval populations were already small. Losing a few thousand people mattered. Losing the ability to feed the remaining population mattered even more. War turned land into an enemy. Fields that once provided life became sources of failure. Hunger did not end when fighting stopped, it waited patiently afterward. People adapted where they could. They moved to safer areas. They changed crops. They abandoned risky land. These choices helped individuals survive, but weakened overall population distribution. Large empty areas created new problems. Wildlife moved in. Predators returned. Travel became dangerous. Trade routes shifted. Isolation increased. War also damaged social structure. Families were separated. Communities lost leaders. Organization weakened. Recovery required cooperation, but cooperation was hard after years of fear. The strange thing is that war often felt temporary. People believed things would return to normal once it ended. Sometimes they did. Often they didn't. A single long conflict could reduce a region's population so much that it never returned to previous levels, not because people stopped existing, but because they moved, aged, or failed to replace themselves. This created population bottlenecks. Human numbers shrank not through sudden destruction, but through slow absence. War did not need to kill directly to threaten survival. It only needed to interrupt food production long enough. And it did this very well. Over time, repeated conflicts reshaped where people lived. Safe regions grew, dangerous regions emptied. Humanity survived by concentrating in fewer places, which created new risks. Crowding increased sickness. Competition increased stress. The margin for error shrank. People living through this did not see a global picture. They saw personal loss, a field burned, a barn emptied, a neighbor gone. They rebuilt because they had to. They replanted because there was no alternative. But each rebuild became harder. War stole the future by stealing the land. As fields lay unused and villages faded, humanity came close to shrinking beyond recovery more than once. Survival depended on peace lasting just long enough to heal. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it didn't.
Animals were part of medieval life. They worked, they fed families, and sometimes they caused serious problems without meaning to. People lived close to animals because they had to. Cows, goats, pigs, chickens, horses, these were not distant farm creatures. They shared space, air, and sometimes even shelter with humans. During cold months, animals were brought closer to homes to keep them alive and useful. This closeness helped survival, but it also created risk. Animals carry things humans cannot see. When people and animals live side by side every day, those invisible problems move easily. A small scratch, a bite, or even shared space could turn into sickness later. But animals caused trouble in other ways too. When food was scarce, animals became competition. They needed grain just like people. Feeding animals meant less food for humans. Not feeding animals meant losing tools, transport, and future food. It was a hard choice either way. During harsh winters, wild animals moved closer to human settlements. Forests no longer provided enough food. Wolves followed livestock. Sometimes they followed people.
Attacks were rare, but hunger changes behavior. Even fear mattered. People avoided traveling alone, trade slowed, communication dropped, isolation increased. Rodents were an even bigger problem. They thrived wherever humans lived. Stored grain, warm buildings, waste, perfect conditions. People tried to control them, but success was limited. Rodents damaged food supplies quietly. A storehouse could look fine on the outside, while inside food was ruined. People often discovered the problem too late, when hunger had already started. Animals also damaged land. Overgrazing weakened soil, trampling ruined fields. In areas already struggling, this reduced future harvests. Domesticated animals could be dangerous too. Large animals are unpredictable. A kick, a fall, or being crushed could cause serious injury. Without proper treatment, even small injuries became life-threatening. People accepted these risks because animals were essential. There was no alternative. As human populations dropped due to other problems, animals gained space. Abandoned villages became grazing land. Forests expanded. Wildlife returned. This sounds peaceful, but it created new challenges. Reclaimed land was harder to farm again. Predators returned. Travel routes became dangerous. Settlements became isolated. Nature does not wait politely for humans to recover. There were times when animals outnumbered people in certain regions. This changed balance. Farming became harder. Protection became harder. Survival became more uncertain. Animals also spread sickness indirectly. Waste contaminated water. Fleas and insects moved between animals and humans. People noticed sickness, but rarely connected it to animals. And animals did not disappear when humans struggled. They adapted faster. Shorter lifespans meant faster recovery. While human populations took generations to rebound, animal populations returned quickly. This imbalance mattered. In weakened communities, losing a few people to animal-related problems mattered more. There were fewer replacements. Every loss slowed recovery. People adapted slowly. They built stronger enclosures, changed grazing habits, avoided certain areas. These changes helped but required time and labor that was often in short supply. Children again faced greater risk. They played near animals. They helped with chores. They were smaller and more vulnerable to accidents and sickness. Animals were not enemies. They were just living their lives. But in a fragile world, even neutral forces can push survival toward collapse. There is something quietly unsettling about this. Humanity was not only threatened by dramatic forces, but by everyday life continuing as usual. Feeding animals, walking paths, storing grain, ordinary tasks carried hidden risk. Yet people survived by learning balance. They learned when to keep animals close and when to keep distance, which areas to avoid, which practices caused problems. This knowledge was local, passed through habit, not books. When communities disappeared, that knowledge disappeared with them. That loss mattered. Some regions struggled repeatedly because they lost people who understood the land and animals. New settlers had to relearn lessons the hard way. Animals did not intend to harm humanity, but in times of weakness, they became part of the pressure pushing populations downward. And still, people continued to depend on them. This constant dependence made medieval survival a careful negotiation. Too close, and danger increased. Too distant, and survival failed. Humanity walked that line for centuries.
Medieval towns did not smell great. That's not an insult, it's just a fact of life back then. People lived packed together, often inside walls, with very little space to spare. Houses leaned toward each other. Streets were narrow. Fresh air did not move easily, and everything people produced during daily life had to go somewhere. Most of the time, it went outside, or at least people hoped it did. Waste management was simple. Too simple. Many homes had pits nearby. Some used shared spaces. Some used the street. When it rained, everything moved. When it didn't, everything stayed. This created an environment where problems slowly built up. Waste attracted insects. Insects thrived. Rodents followed. Animals moved through it. People walked through it. Children played near it. and nobody thought much about it because it was normal. Normal does not mean safe. Living surrounded by waste weakened people over time. Small cuts became infected. Skin problems lasted longer. Illness spread more easily in crowded, dirty spaces. And the worst part was how familiar it felt. When something is always around, it stops being noticed. Smells became background noise. Flies became part of summer. People adjusted. But bodies did not adjust as well. Constant exposure to filth stressed the immune system. People were always fighting something, even when they felt fine. This made them weaker when real sickness arrived. Crowding made things worse. Many families shared small rooms. Windows were small or non-existent. Smoke from fires built up indoors. Breathing was already difficult before sickness arrived. Poor air quality caused long-term lung problems. People coughed often. Breathing felt heavy. Recovery from illness took longer. Children grew up in these conditions from birth. Their bodies adapted somewhat, but at a cost. Growth slowed. Strength was limited. Survival rates dropped quietly. Waste also contaminated food indirectly. Animals walked through it, then into kitchens. Hands touched everything. Washing was limited by water availability. Cleanliness was not ignored, but it was hard to achieve consistently. People washed when they could. They cleaned when possible, but the environment worked against them. During busy seasons, towns filled with visitors. More people meant more waste. More waste meant more problems. Temporary crowding could cause long-term damage. Rain did not solve the problem, it moved it. Waste flowed downhill into low areas. These areas often held water. Water mixed with everything else, and people still used it. Summer heat made things worse. Smells intensified. Food spoiled faster. Insects multiplied. Illness followed. Winter did not help either. Frozen waste stayed where it was until thaw. When thaw came, everything returned at once. This constant cycle shaped medieval health quietly. There was no single moment of collapse, just steady pressure. Some towns tried to improve conditions. They set rules, they designated areas, they built drainage where possible. These efforts helped slightly, but enforcement was difficult. Resources were limited. Even small improvements made a difference. Towns with better layouts survived better. Those without struggled. Rural areas had more space but fewer resources. Waste spread over land. Animals moved freely. Water sources were closer to fields. Different risks, same outcome. Living in constant mess reduced resilience. When hunger, cold, or sickness arrived, bodies already worn down could not respond well. This is how sanitation threatened survival. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but persistently. People did not feel clean or dirty in a modern sense. They felt normal. They worked, slept, ate, and repeated. The environment was accepted, and acceptance allowed problems to stay. The strange thing is that medieval people were not careless. They simply worked with what they had. Cleanliness required water, time, and space. All were limited. As populations grew, conditions worsened. As populations shrank, abandoned areas slowly improved. This created a strange balance. Too many people created danger. Too few people lost knowledge. Some cities reached a breaking point. Sickness became common. Productivity dropped. People left. The city shrank until conditions improved again. Humanity survived this not because conditions were good, but because populations adjusted naturally. Growth created pressure. Pressure caused decline. Decline reduced pressure. It was an uncomfortable balance, but it worked just enough. Living surrounded by waste did not end humanity, but it constantly pushed it closer to the edge. People did not imagine a cleaner future. They imagined survival tomorrow. That focus kept them moving forward, even when conditions were far from ideal.
Knowledge is easy to lose. It doesn't vanish with a noise. It fades. In the medieval world, survival depended heavily on what people remembered and passed on. There were few books, fewer people who could read them. Most knowledge lived in habits, routines, and spoken advice. When people disappeared, their knowledge often went with them. This made humanity fragile in a way that is easy to miss.
Farming methods, for example, were learned by watching and doing. When a skilled farmer died without passing on experience, that loss mattered. When many did, entire communities struggled to grow food the same way again. Some techniques took generations to develop, knowing when to plant, how to rotate crops, which land needed rest, which seeds worked best in certain soil. These were not written instructions, they were lived experience. When populations dropped due to hunger, sickness, or conflict, these systems broke down. New people moved in, or survivors tried to continue without enough guidance. Mistakes happened, yields dropped, failure followed. The same happened with building. Knowing how to construct sturdy homes mattered. Poorly built houses collapsed, leaked, or burned more easily. When skilled builders were lost, structures weakened, fire spread faster, cold reached deeper indoors. Tool-making suffered too. Blacksmithing, carpentry, and repair skills kept communities functioning. Losing a few skilled workers could stall everything. Broken tools stayed broken. Work slowed. Food production dropped. This wasn't dramatic, it was cumulative. Knowledge loss also affected medicine. Some people had learned what worked through experience. Gentle treatments, careful observation. When those people died, their methods often disappeared. New healers repeated old mistakes. Harsh treatments returned. Recovery rates dropped. The danger of lost knowledge was how invisible it was. People did not know what they no longer knew. They only knew that life felt harder than it used to. Sometimes communities noticed decline but blamed luck or weather. They didn't realize they were missing techniques that once made survival easier. Travel became harder too. Roads fell into disrepair. Bridges collapsed. Without people who knew how to fix them, routes changed or disappeared. Trade slowed. Isolation increased. Isolation made everything worse. Without trade, areas lacked resources they once depended on. Tools, materials, and food became scarce. Communities became trapped by their environment. Even language changed. Terms for tools, plants, or methods vanished when no one used them anymore. Once gone, rediscovery took time. Knowledge loss also affected safety. People forgot why certain practices existed. Rules without explanation faded. Risk increased. For example, if a community forgot why a certain area was avoided, they might settle there again. Floods returned. Crops failed. Lessons had to be relearned through loss. This cycle happened repeatedly. Human populations during medieval times were not stable. They rose and fell. Each fall risked knowledge loss. Each recovery started slightly behind where the last one left off. Sometimes entire regions regressed, infrastructure decayed, systems simplified, survival became more basic. This does not mean people became less intelligent. It means they had fewer tools and less shared memory to work with. Learning takes time. Time was often cut short. Children grew up learning what adults knew. If adults knew less, children started with less. Generations inherited gaps. Over centuries, this created uneven development. Some regions advanced slowly, others stalled, some declined. The danger here was not extinction in one moment, but the slow reduction of capability. Humanity could survive fewer challenges at once. When cold, sickness, and hunger arrived together, knowledge mattered more than ever, and sometimes it wasn't there. People adapted by simplifying. They focused on what worked reliably. This helped survival, but limited growth. Risk increased if conditions changed. Still, humanity endured. Knowledge never vanished completely. It moved, it hid in habits, it survived in small pockets. When conditions improved, people rebuilt. But rebuilding from partial memory is slow. The medieval world spent much of its time relearning lessons already learned before. That repetition cost lives. From a distance, it looks inefficient. From inside, it was survival. People did not think about lost knowledge. They thought about feeding families, fixing roofs, getting through winter. And somehow, that focus carried humanity forward. Nature is usually predictable. That's what makes it useful. Seasons follow patterns, rain comes and goes, temperatures rise and fall. Medieval people depended on this rhythm more than anything else. Their food, shelter, and survival were built around it. But sometimes, nature stopped playing fair. Sudden changes in climate hit medieval societies hard. A few colder years in a row could undo decades of stability. Crops that once grew reliably failed, livestock weakened, stored food vanished faster than expected. The problem wasn't just one bad year, it was when bad years stacked on top of each other. A colder summer meant grain didn't fully ripen, a wet harvest ruined what little grew, an early winter finished off the rest. By the time people realized what was happening, it was already too late to fix. Medieval farming had very little buffer. Storage existed, but only enough for short shortages. Long-term failures pushed people into survival mode quickly. When food ran low, everything else changed. People ate less, bodies weakened, resistance dropped. Small illnesses became serious. Recovery slowed. Animals suffered too. Weak livestock produced less milk, fewer offspring, and less meat. Some died. That loss reduced future food even more. Nature also changed water patterns. Floods destroyed fields, droughts cracked soil, both left land unusable for seasons at a time. Flooding was especially cruel. It arrived suddenly, took everything, and left behind damaged soil. Fields filled with debris, seeds washed away. Recovery took years. Droughts were quieter. Crops simply stopped growing. Wells dried. People walked farther for water. Animals collapsed. Neither gave warnings that could be acted on easily. Forests reacted too. Changes in temperature affected tree growth. Wood supplies shifted. Fuel became scarce. Heating homes grew harder. Cold years meant people burned more wood. Forests thinned faster. Longer-term shortages followed. The medieval world did not have global awareness. People didn't know if conditions were local or widespread. That uncertainty made planning impossible. If a village thought it was alone, it waited for help. If everyone was suffering, help never came. Nature also affected disease indirectly. Cooler, wetter conditions changed how illnesses spread. Populations already weakened by hunger became vulnerable. This combination was dangerous. Hunger didn't just starve people, it prepared them for collapse. Some communities tried to move. Migration was risky. New land meant unknown soil, unknown neighbors, and unknown dangers. But staying was sometimes worse. Movement caused its own problems. Overcrowding elsewhere increased pressure. Resources stretched thinner. Conflicts grew. Nature didn't care. Even skilled planning couldn't fully protect people. Medieval tools were limited. Predictions were guesswork. Once the season failed, options vanished. This created a sense of helplessness. People worked harder for less result. Exhaustion grew. Morale dropped. When humans feel powerless, mistakes increase. Fields were overused. Soil quality declined. Short-term survival damaged long-term stability. Nature sometimes recovered quickly. Other times it didn't. Prolonged changes reshaped regions. Entire areas became less productive for generations. Populations shifted slowly. Knowledge adapted, but not instantly. One of the most dangerous aspects was how invisible long-term change could be. People blamed a bad year, then another, without realizing the pattern had shifted. By the time they noticed, systems built for the old climate no longer worked. Human survival during medieval times depended on flexibility. Communities that adapted quickly survived better. Those that resisted change suffered longer. Adaptation was hard when resources were low. People adjusted diets, they planted different crops where possible, they reduced herd sizes, they shared food when they could. Still, nature held the advantage.
These environmental shifts didn't wipe out humanity, but they repeatedly pushed it toward the edge. Each time required recovery. Each recovery left scars. The constant rebuilding drained energy from progress. Instead of improving life, people focused on restoring what was lost. Nature was not hostile. It was indifferent. The medieval world lived under that indifference every day. Despite this, people endured. They learned new patterns, they changed habits, they survived enough to pass knowledge forward. Humanity's strength was not control over nature, but persistence within it.
Fear is useful. It keeps you alert. It stops you from touching hot things. It reminds you not to eat food that smells suspicious. But fear without understanding can be dangerous. And in the medieval world, fear often ran far ahead of knowledge. When people didn't know why something was happening, they filled the gap with guesses. Those guesses shaped behavior, and behavior sometimes made survival harder instead of easier. Illness is a good example. When sickness appeared suddenly, people noticed patterns but not causes. One house got sick, then another, then a whole street. The spread felt intentional, like something moving with purpose. That idea alone changed how people reacted. Instead of isolating quietly, communities panicked. People fled suddenly, carrying illness with them. Others locked themselves indoors, sometimes with already sick family members, increasing exposure. Some towns closed their gates too late. Others closed them too early, cutting off food supplies. Both choices caused problems. Fear made people rush decisions. When something unfamiliar happened, blame followed quickly. It was comforting to think someone was responsible. Blame gave fear a target. This often caused social breakdown. Trust disappeared, cooperation stopped. People focused on protecting themselves, even if it hurt the group. Isolation sounds safe, but it can weaken survival. Shared labor mattered, shared food mattered, shared care mattered. Fear also changed how people treated the sick. Some avoided them entirely, others abandoned them too early. Without care, recovery dropped. In calmer times, communities supported each other. In fearful times, that support vanished. Fear influenced food choices too. During shortages, rumors spread about unsafe foods. People avoided things that were actually edible. Desperation increased. At the same time, fear pushed people toward risky alternatives, eating spoiled food, drinking unsafe water, anything that seemed better than nothing. These choices added stress to already weakened bodies. Fear also slowed learning. When people were afraid, they stuck to familiar habits, even if those habits no longer worked. Trying something new felt dangerous. Innovation requires calm. Panic shuts it down. Environmental changes, illness, and scarcity demanded flexibility. Fear demanded rigidity. This conflict reduced survival chances. Even animals reacted to human fear. Abandoned farms attracted wildlife. Crops were eaten. Storage was raided. Fear created feedback loops. When people left areas suddenly, infrastructure decayed. Wells broke, roads vanished. Returning became harder. Sometimes fear spread faster than the actual danger. Stories traveled quickly, news changed as it moved. By the time it arrived somewhere new, it sounded worse than reality. Preparations were extreme. Communities exhausted resources preparing for threats that never fully arrived. Meanwhile, real problems continued quietly. Fear also affected leadership. Decisions were made to calm panic, not to solve issues. Short-term comfort replaced long-term planning. Leaders who promised safety through extreme measures gained support, even if those measures caused harm later. This pattern repeated often. Fear of outsiders increased too. Trade slowed, exchange of information stopped, isolation grew. Without trade, communities lost access to tools, materials, and food they relied on. Self-sufficiency sounded good until something failed. When fear blocked cooperation, survival became harder for everyone. Children were especially affected. They absorbed fear without context.
Growing up in constant anxiety weakened resilience. Stress affected health. Fear changed sleep patterns. People stayed awake longer. Rest suffered. Fatigue increased mistakes. Mistakes caused accidents. Accidents caused injury. Injury reduced labor. Small problems stacked up. The medieval world did not have ways to manage fear effectively. There were no clear explanations, no shared understanding, no reliable reassurance. Fear was reasonable but unmanaged. Despite this, humanity survived because fear was not constant. Panic came in waves. Between those waves, people rebuilt trust. When fear eased, cooperation returned, sharing resumed, learning restarted. These cycles shaped medieval life. Fear didn't almost end humanity by itself, but it made every other danger sharper. Hunger felt worse, illness spread faster, environmental stress hit harder. The strange part is that fear often arrived before danger peaked and stayed after danger passed. That delay caused unnecessary damage. Still, people learned slowly. Communities that managed fear better survived better. Calm leadership mattered. Shared routines helped. Humans are social creatures. When fear pulled them apart, survival suffered. When they stayed together, chances improved. Fear was a test humanity passed imperfectly, again and again.
Recovery sounds like the good part, the moment after survival, the calm after chaos. But in the medieval world, recovery often carried its own risks. Sometimes, getting better was almost as dangerous as getting worse. After a period of hunger, sickness, or environmental stress, populations slowly began to grow again. Fields were replanted, animals reproduced, towns refilled. Life returned to something close to normal. That return felt hopeful. But the systems people rebuilt were usually the same ones that failed before. Land that had rested during population decline was suddenly pushed hard again. Fields were planted without pause. Soil lost nutrients faster than it could recover. Harvests looked fine at first, then slowly weakened. People didn't notice immediately. Early success gave confidence. Confidence encouraged expansion. Expansion increased pressure. Food production returned, but storage did not improve much. Communities remembered survival, not prevention. They focused on today's meal, not next decade's shortage. As populations grew, towns became crowded again, houses filled, streets narrowed, waste increased. The same sanitation problems quietly returned. Recovery erased memory of danger faster than danger erased people. Animals returned too. Herds grew quickly, grazing intensified, land degraded, pastures thinned, livestock health declined. This made communities vulnerable to the next shock. Trade also resumed. This was mostly good. It brought tools, food, and ideas, but it also brought dependency. Regions specialized again. One area focused on grain, another on animals, another on tools. Efficiency increased, but flexibility decreased. If trade routes failed, shortages hit harder than before. Recovery encouraged rebuilding old habits instead of inventing new ones. Familiar systems felt safe, changing them felt risky. Ironically, the moment when change was most possible was also when it was least likely. Labor shortages during decline sometimes forced innovation. Simple tools replaced complex ones. Workflows adapted. But when population recovered, those innovations were often abandoned. Old ways returned. Why fix what seems to work? This mindset delayed progress. Recovery also affected social structure. Land ownership changed. New leaders rose. Inequality grew again. As wealth concentrated, access to food and safety became uneven. Some people thrived, others hovered near survival. Uneven recovery created weak points. When stress returned, it hit the vulnerable first. That triggered wider collapse. The medieval world experienced this cycle repeatedly: decline, recovery, expansion, pressure, collapse. Each cycle shaved a little off humanity's margin for error. People did not track these patterns scientifically, they lived them emotionally. Hope followed despair, despair followed hope.
Children born during recovery grew up believing stability was normal. They had no memory of collapse. That made preparation unlikely. By the time warning signs appeared, systems were already strained. Weather shifts mattered more during recovery. A single bad harvest after expansion caused more damage than during stable times. Why? Because more people depended on less resilient systems. Recovery also increased movement. People traveled more, trade expanded, information spread faster. This was useful, but also risky. Problems moved faster too. Overconfidence was another danger. Surviving hardship gave a sense of strength. People believed they could handle whatever came next. Sometimes they could, sometimes they couldn't. The medieval world had limited tools to measure risk, no long-term data, no forecasts. Decisions were based on memory and feeling, and memory faded quickly during good times. Recovery also pulled resources away from maintenance. Roads, bridges, and wells were used heavily but repaired slowly. Infrastructure aged quietly. When it failed, consequences were immediate. The idea of saving for the future existed, but survival demands were constant. Surplus rarely stayed surplus for long. Despite all this, humanity did not disappear. Why? Because even imperfect recovery was better than none. Even fragile systems kept people alive long enough to adapt again. Each cycle taught something, even if the lesson was incomplete. Gradually, knowledge accumulated. Small improvements stuck. Storage improved slightly. Farming diversified a little. Town planning adjusted here and there. Progress was slow, uneven, often reversed, but it moved forward overall. Recovery was dangerous because it tempted people to forget limits, but it was also proof that survival was possible. Humanity almost pushed itself too far many times, not through one mistake, but through repetition. Yet every recovery added experience. Even failure left behind fragments of learning. The medieval world was not one long decline. It was a series of near misses, and those near misses shaped the future. The strange truth is that humanity didn't survive because it avoided danger. It survived because it kept returning from it, slightly wiser each time. That quiet persistence mattered more than any single breakthrough.